Well, welcome to another edition of Upfront here on Shaw TV. I'm your host, Jim Claggett. Today joining me is Dr. Keith Wolstenholme, who is an orthopedic surgeon who works out of the Red Deer Regional Hospital. And that's our topic for today, that hospital and the problems that are impacting things, patients, doctors, nurses, everybody that works within that building. So this has been something that's been going on for a while, Keith. And so maybe you could kind of give me the Reader's Digest version of where things were. You've been here 7 years, you said, and where things are now and how it came to that head to have that meeting a little while back.
Well, coming to a head is a good description. So as care providers at Red Deer Regional Hospital and for Central Zone, we've noticed, certainly over the last few years, an increasing amount of times when our hospital has been on overcapacity, meaning no available beds for patients to come into the hospital, and increasing cancellations of surgery because there's no beds for the patients to be looked after post-operatively, and really a lack of access for patients to get quality care in Red Deer Regional and Central Zone. And frankly, we're in this job to look after people, and we were frustrated with our inability to take the kind of care for patients that we wanted to take.
Now, you know, we can use a lot of medical cliches, I guess, but would it be almost accurate to describe the building and the service that people are facing as being on life support right about now?
It's a good term. We're really in a critical condition at Red Deer Regional. We're doing our best. The waters are threatening to close over our heads and over our patients' heads.
The issues, I guess, go from department to department, but one of the people that we talked to that day during the meeting over at the Baymont Inn was about the overflow, the people that are being impacted on a regular basis, booking surgeries, like you said. We'll just listen to what they had to say, and then we'll get your reaction from that.
Well, the biggest frustration we have is lack of inpatient hospital beds. We have patients every day that get their elective surgeries canceled and have to be rescheduled, and a lot of them have been planned a year or maybe more in advance to make that day happen, and then the day of the surgery it's canceled because we don't have a bed available for them. That's our biggest problem that we face on a day-to-day basis.
All right, so Blair mentioned, you know, surgeries being booked well in advance, sometimes a year, almost 2 years sometimes, and then they get to the day, they show up, and there's no bed for them. How much of that are you seeing on a regular basis or a somewhat regular basis? What do you think?
So unfortunately, it happens very commonly. There's at least the threat of cancellation of elective surgeries every day that we do surgery. And that threat often comes to fruition where patients are canceled. And you can imagine from a patient's perspective, this is heartbreaking. First of all, the patient may have waited a year or more than a year to see a specialist. So they've seen their family doctor, you know, it's been decided that they need to have surgery, they wait a year to see a specialist, and then they may wait 6 to 12 more months for their surgery day. You can imagine that the arrangements they've made, family members to come in to look after children or to make arrangements for work, and day of, they get the word, sorry, there's no beds in the hospital to look after you, your surgery is being canceled. And it was told to us for a long time by administration that we shouldn't say the word canceled. We should say that the patients were deferred. But deferring means that they have another date. There should be another date down the road for them. That doesn't happen. They're canceled. They have to go back to the end of the list to find some other time for surgery. Those patients are canceled. And the reason why they're canceled is that we're dramatically short of inpatient beds at Red Deer Regional Hospital. And the 2014 needs assessment that's been well documented said as of that time, 96 inpatient beds short. And that number is going to double by 2025.
The impact obviously on the patients is immense. What about on the staff? The doctors, the nurses, everybody that's involved that would have been doing something that day, how does that impact them?
Well, it's very frustrating. We don't sit empty. What we try to do in that scenario is we try to take patients off of the trauma list and do their surgeries in order to get them in and out of the system. For example, a patient with an ankle fracture or an elbow fracture might be sitting, waiting in a bed for their chance for their trauma surgery to be done for 2, 3, or 4 days, occupying a bed, when all they really need is a slot to do the surgery, get them in, get them out. So as healthcare providers, we just sort of look to the next person in line, which is in and of itself a bit of a morbid thought, right? You're looking at the ad list. Okay, here's a 7-year-old with a broken elbow. Here's a 20-year-old with appendicitis. Here's an 80-year-old with a hip fracture. Which patient's suffering can we end right now? It's almost like a bizarre version of the Hunger Games, trying to decide who's going to get treatment.
The triage is part of the business, but this is maybe unnecessary triage?
Yeah, this takes triaging to an extreme. If you can't meet recognized standards for looking after patients, both for trauma and elective, then you're really out of element for triaging. We're past the point where simple triage parameters can solve this problem. We're really at a lack of capacity problem.
The Alberta Health Services, of course, obviously is the other side of this equation, or another part of this equation, I should say. They released a statement on behalf of Sherry Allen, who's the Acting Chief Zone Officer for the Central Zone. Basically, she said that as the Regional Hospital Centre is the primary site for the Central Zone, any expansion plans are highly dependent on the long-range planning for the entire zone. So it says that they're in the midst of a long-range planning process for the Central Alberta region, and to paraphrase, they want to work together with the community partners, but on how healthcare can evolve over the next 15 years. Now, the 15 years is what jumped out at me on this statement. You need something now, like in the next 6 months. How does that sit with you?
That's obviously a very scary proposition to hear medical leadership or Alberta Health Services leadership speak in terms of 15 years down the road. You know, we've done a lot of planning for Red Deer Regional and Central Zone. If you look at the planning documents done since 2007, we've had 15 planning documents talking about the need for hospital expansion, the need for bed expansion. Our net increase as a result of all those documents and hospital beds has been exactly 0 increased hospital beds since 2007. Now, of course, we're willing to plan, to do the planning, to meet with administration, to meet with Alberta Health Services, to do whatever we need to do to secure expansion in the future. But I would like some recognition of the work done in the past that indicates our dramatic need for improvement. That's an Alberta Health Services document from 2014 that says we're 96 inpatient beds short, 18 emergency beds short, 3 operating rooms beds short. The planning has been done. Certainly, is there a need for future planning? Okay, we'll accept that. But how about some results, some action taken as a result of the planning? The zone planning you've mentioned, and Alberta Health Services has stressed this, that there needs to be a zone plan in order for expansion funding to occur. And Edmonton, for example, has a zone plan. And we saw in their most recent budget that Edmonton got a lot of healthcare infrastructure dollars promised. But Calgary doesn't have a zone plan. Other zones don't have a zone plan. And yet they've received hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure in the last few years, and Central Zone simply hasn't.
One of the issues that was brought up at that overflow meeting at the Baymont was the fact that the boundaries were changed years ago through Alberta Health Services. It didn't impact Edmonton or Calgary. Their boundaries didn't change, but Red Deer Regional saw a huge change, and as we hear from this gentleman, it had an impact.
Well, I've been a physician in Alberta for about 30 years, and I've seen how we've lost capacity in the system right across the province, and it's much more acute recently in the Red Deer area and in central Alberta generally. When Ron Leipert chose to disrupt the whole system by bringing in Alberta Health Services, the boundaries did not change for Calgary or Edmonton, but essentially we in the David Thompson Health Region, where Red Deer Hospital is the regional centre, we more or less adopted the East Central area. So now there's a lot of traffic coming into Red Deer patient-wise that is, in all disciplines, from Camrose and beyond. I work at the Centennial Centre in Ponoka, and we're taking patients from the Saskatchewan border to Hanna to Jasper. They're all coming into central Alberta, some of them staying in that area, but Red Deer still has to serve as a regional hospital, and so all the rural centres really find themselves taxed when the business that they send to Red Deer cannot be dealt with in a timely manner. And as you may have heard, in 2014, 2015, it was already decided that there were probably 100 beds short and 3 operating rooms short. And so we've been dealing with that. We've had population increase in the meantime. And as I say, the changes in the boundaries have really affected the central Alberta zone because of the extra population that we've had to serve without any increase in resources.
So basically, as he explained, you've adopted patients from eastern Alberta and western Alberta. You really are a regional hospital now.
Absolutely. At the meeting that you referenced at Baymont Inn on February 28th, I put up a slide of what Central Zone actually encompassed. It's border to border. It's Drayton Valley, Wetaskiwin, Sundre, Drumheller, all the way east, Coronation, Castor. People gasped. People in the audience had no idea that Red Deer Regional Hospital was the referral hub for all of those patients. We are the hub that provides specialized surgical care, medical care, specialized care for these patients. And the numbers are at minimum 350,000 Albertans use Red Deer Regional as their primary hospital. And Central Zone is between 450 and 500,000 Albertans, and Red Deer Regional is the only regional referral facility. And despite the fact that our region has grown, our zone has grown, we have not seen a resultant increase in healthcare infrastructure investment.
Now, and to emphasize that point, we have another lady who was at that meeting waiting to get in to say her piece, and she's a former patient here in central Alberta. And she had some thoughts about that impact of things happening, not enough specialists having to go elsewhere for treatment. Let's hear what she has to say.
I'm here today. I've had multiple surgeries, both cancer and spinal surgeries. Both I actually had to travel to Calgary and Edmonton. The problem is bigger than just Red Deer not having enough specialists or beds. There simply isn't the specialty areas here as well. So I was on a wait list to see a Calgary surgeon for over a year and a half in debilitating pain, 10 out of 10. So after waiting that long, took matters into our own hands, flew out of country to Germany and received successful surgery there. Every day for the last 3 months, my father's been in the Red Deer Regional Hospital suffering a stroke, and every single day over the loudspeakers we hear that there's a shortage of beds. I see people behind a curtain in a hallway for treatment. It's just unacceptable.
If you had a question once you get in there, what would you want to be asking the doctors that are putting this on, or maybe even a question for the people that are delaying it from happening?
I think it's more less of a question for the doctors. I think that they're doing the very best that they can. I look at our leadership, and as a taxpayer, when I see buildings being erected for recreation and we have people suffering, health is first. You ask any Canadian what's the most important thing to them, and they'll tell you health. It's not an arts and culture center. It's not a recreation center. Those things are needed, but we better take care of our number one priority, and that's our health. That's why I'm here today.
Well, as we've mentioned, this lady was a former patient. She has witnessed and felt firsthand the impact of not having a specialist, having to go elsewhere. And her thoughts, of course, we're calling the political leadership in our province to task for what's going on. What are your thoughts on that, Keith?
Well, ultimately, the provincial government holds the purse strings, and ultimately, the buck really does stop with them. Now, our current government is not to blame for past inequities. It's been well established that Central Zone and Red Deer Regional has not received adequate investment since 2003, maybe 2005. So that's a dozen years without adequate in infrastructure investment. So the prior government, the current government, Alberta Health Services, they all have to own up to the fact that there's been really unfair investment in Central Zone as far as healthcare dollars go. I'm sure there's been investment in other areas, but I think if you would ask most people what is the most important thing to them, they would say their health. And we have just not had fair investment in healthcare in our zone. Our patients' tax dollars, they're not worth as much as a patient who lives in another area of Alberta, in any other area of Alberta, not just Edmonton, Calgary, South Zone, North Zone, have all seen dramatic investment in healthcare, and we simply haven't seen it in Central Zone.
Now, earlier in the conversation, we did talk about meetings. When was the last time the doctors as a group met with Alberta Health Services, and when do you see the next meeting happening?
The local Red Deer Regional Hospital physician leadership did meet with 3 vice presidents from Alberta Health Services early in 2017, and I must say it was an angry meeting. The physicians were unhappy with what we perceive as unfair treatment for our zone. And we didn't leave with good answers. We didn't leave with a lot of hope as to what was going to happen in the future that would reverse these unfair investments in the past. Now, since the meeting on February 28th and since the public interest that it's generated, I think the public has realized, they've been shown that they're not being treated fairly in Central Zone. There has been a little bit of increased interest from Alberta Health Services, and we do have another planning meeting scheduled for April where we're going to talk about, okay, what boxes do we need to tick in order to get ourselves A, back on the urgent priority list that we fell off of inexplicably, and B, how do we get on the budget a year from today when the new budget is announced? How do we ensure that Red Deer Regional Hospital redevelopment and expansion is on that list? And we're willing to work with anybody that we need to work with in order to look after our patients fairly and equitably.
Well, it definitely sounds like this issue still has a bit of a pulse, but you need it to be a little bit stronger.
Absolutely. We need support. We need support from everybody. We need support from our patients. We need support from the public. We need support from local government, from provincial government, and from Alberta Health Services. Everybody needs to work together in order for us to be treated fairly.
Absolutely. Well, we could go on and on and on, I'm sure, about this issue, but I think we're going to wrap it up with that right now. My thanks to Dr. Wolstenholme for joining us today, and that's pretty much it for Upfront in this episode. Thank you for joining us, and have a good day.